Education Coordinator at Mass Audubon's Connecticut River Valley Sanctuaries based in East Hampton, Massachusetts. She has worked in the environmental education field for over 30 years, developing, teaching, and overseeing adult programs, day camps, nature preschools, and special events. So please help me welcome back Patti Steinman.
Hey, thank you, Penny. Okay, so here comes the hardest part, making sure that I can share my screen. So here we go. Can you guys see that?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay, yeah. Brianne, I still have the survey. Can I just click that off?
Yes, go ahead and close that now.
Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a walk through spring in New England. Sometimes it comes early, sometimes it comes and then disappears. We've been very fortunate the past 2 weeks to have some beautiful spring weather. And just as Penny and Brianne said, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. And I'm fine if it's okay with Penny and Brianne, if you'd like to ask them during the program or wait until after. So this is spring, and this is a beautiful wildflower. Anybody want to put in the chat what they think this is? Or what they know this is? Mm-hmm. And I'm not able to read the chat, so Penny or Brianne, if you want to answer, that'd be great.
Trillium.
Trillium, perfect. Okay, so that's a great one to start with. And I just wanted to also, Penny gave thanks to these two organizations which helped do the funding as well. So thank you. Okay, and so spring in New England. These are some of the things that we see when we think of spring. So one of the first things is when we see these odd looking trees with buckets growing from them. And here in New England, we're really fortunate to be one of the few states that produces maple syrup. So this time of year, when the days are above freezing and the nights are below freezing, that's when the sap begins to run in the trees. So a tree in the winter time, it's dormant, it's still alive, but it's dormant. Then once the days get warmer, day length is longer, then the sap, and again, the sap begins to start running. There is sap in every tree, but sugar maples, one of the several types of maples that we have, has the highest sugar content. So it's about 4% sugar. And then of course we collect that sap, we boil out the water, and we get wonderful maple syrup. So this tree, this branch on the left, this is from a red maple. So I mentioned that there's several species of maples in our area. Sugar maple is what we get the syrup from. The red maple is probably the first one to leaf out in the spring. So we begin to see the red maple buds right now. If you go for a walk in the woods, or if you go by your home and you have red maple trees, you'll probably begin to see the buds beginning to swell up. And of course, that's where the buds contain the leaves or flowers. Often at the top, that's going to turn into a flower, and usually the side ones will turn into leaves. And to the right, we see a beautiful red maple tree. There's always something red about a red maple. Whoops, sorry about that. Let me see if I can just go back there. That went too quick. There we go. So we think of that. I was just saying that the maple tree, the maple is a deciduous tree. So deciduous meaning loses its leaves in the winter time. And that's an adaptation to the winter. It's an adaptation so that cold and frost does not get in and harm the tree. The conifer trees, or the evergreens, such as this one over here, this is a white pine, they do not lose all of their needles throughout the year. The needles are leaves, but they lose them continuously, kind of how we shed our skin. We're not like a snake. We don't lose it all at once. We shed it kind of continuously. And same thing with the evergreen trees. But then come spring, they're ahead of the game. They don't have to start producing all new leaves. They already have a lot. They can begin to photosynthesize and kind of get on their job of producing food. A few other trees. There's the shad bush, which is the one which is blooming on the left over there. That's another early one to come out in spring. It's said that the shad bush blooms when the shad, which is a type of fish, are running in the river. And the one on the right, this is another really, really early spring tree to begin to flower. I think when we think of flowers, a lot we overlook the fact that trees do produce flowers, and some of them are absolutely gorgeous. This one on the right, it's a tiny, tiny little flower, and this is from the hazelnut, the American hazelnut tree. And that thing hanging down, that's a catkin or the seed producing part. So if you get a chance to go for a walk someplace and you see a tree like this with just little tiny red at the tip, take a closer look. It could be the hazelnut, which again is a beautiful flower. Vernal pools are, vernal meaning spring, is a spring pond. So these are ponds that do not have fish in them at all. Many of them were created by glaciers, and they dry up in the summertime. So since they dry up, they're not able to have fish, and there's certain species of amphibians that live in them and can only breed in these places called vernal pools. And this is the picture on the left, is what it looks like in the winter time, which really around here was just 2 weeks ago or about 10 days ago. And then when it warms up and when you have the snow melt, this is what it looks like on the right. And this is what it looks like in the summer. So it's completely dry in the summer. So as I mentioned, there's a few species of amphibians as well as an invertebrate, one of those things without backbones, that can only breed in a vernal pool. And these critters are what's called explosive breeders. They come down often from the woods and they need to breed, reproduce. The eggs need to develop, or the young need to develop enough that they either get out of the water or they sometimes will hibernate kind of down underneath the muck. And if they get out of the water, they have to do this before things dry up. So this critter over here is probably our most famous vernal pool critter. This is called the spotted salamander, and it's a ritual in the natural world to be looking for the first warm, rainy nights of spring when the temperatures are above 40 degrees, ideally if it's been raining all day long. I'm kind of looking towards Friday for this day, and naturalists all around look for these days, and then they go out to these vernal pools in the dark with flashlights looking for these salamanders. So as I mentioned, it's called a spotted salamander, and the spotted salamander is in a group of salamanders called the mole salamanders. So just like the mammal, the mole, the spotted salamanders live most of their life in the woods under the ground. But come those first warm, rainy nights of spring, they move sometimes over the snow, and they move to these vernal pools. Sometimes they can be seen by the hundreds going to these vernal pools to lay their eggs. So the picture to the left is what you might see if you went out on Friday night. So those little spots, I know sometimes hard to see, but those are all those salamanders. And then what they do is the males come first, the females come a little bit after the males, and then they'll mate, and then the males will leave behind. I'm sorry, they won't mate. They won't mate at all. They don't mate. The males will leave behind these little things that look like breadcrumbs. This is called spermatophore. So the males will lay the spermatophore without mating. The females will come along and they'll pick up the spermatophore, and then the eggs will develop in their cloaca. And then to the right, those are what the eggs look like. So they're masses of eggs. After they lay their eggs, the females will go right back into the woods. After the males leave the spermatophore, they'll go back into the woods. And for the most part, we never see them again for another year. So this again, it's a ritual for many a naturalist, first warm, rainy nights of spring. Can anybody see the salamanders in this picture? If you can, just enter yes in the chat. And if you enter yes in the chat, congratulations, this is your eye test and you've passed. Anybody seeing them, Penny or
We had
Brianne?
a couple yeses in the chat.
Okay, great. So those yeses, again, your vision is very good. And this is sometimes what it looks like. You can hardly see them. In those vernal pools, there's also this little critter, which is called a fairy shrimp. So this is an invertebrate. So an invertebrate, again, without a backbone, like all of the insects. It's actually not an insect, and it's related to the shrimp, maybe to the shrimp that some of us eat. But they're tiny. They're about 1/2 inch in length. And in these vernal pools, if you shine your flashlight on, you can see these fairy shrimp that are just magnificent. They have 11 paired appendages, and they basically, it's almost like they're swimming or floating in the water. If you ever get a chance to even Google this online to see the dance of the fairy shrimp, they're spectacular. Some of them are pinkish in color and just beautiful. Gave me a new appreciation for shrimp. And then in the spring, we often think of frogs. And there's a sequence to when the frogs come to the ponds in Massachusetts or any place. So in Massachusetts, the first 2 frogs to come to the ponds would be this one over here, which is called a wood frog. So the wood frog can also be called the bandit frog. It looks like it has a mask on its face. Both of these pictures are showing the wood frog, and it can only breed in a vernal pool. So it comes down from the woods, thus the name wood frog, and its call is like a quack. Many people hear this and they think it's a duck, and they're looking all over for ducks, and it turns out to be this wood frog. So again, it sounds very much like it's quacking, and they're, again, explosive breeders. They're breeding we have a vernal pool at Arcadia, which is right in East Hampton. And if anybody would like to see this week and next week is the time. Just come right behind the visitor center. There's a boardwalk. And if it's a warm day, you can't help but hear and see these frogs right on the water. So we'll be seeing this for the next week, 2 weeks or so, and then they'll go right back into the woods where they came from. It's a pretty spectacular thing to see. In fact, we have a red-tailed hawk who has learned the call of the wood frog, and as soon as the wood frogs come out, this red-tailed hawk is sitting in the trees just waiting for a meal. The other frog, which I mentioned, which is one of the first ones to come out, is this one on the left. And you can see its vocal sac. So it's calling. This frog is a little tree frog. It's a tiny, tiny little tree frog. It was funny, Penny was talking prior to this meeting starting today, and she was saying how she had a tree frog that came into the house. I can't remember what she was saying it was on, but there was a tree frog in her house. And this frog is probably going to be happier by the pond. But this is actually, I'm not going to tell you what this frog is. It has the X on its back, and I bet a lot of people hear its call, which sounds kind of like peep, 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 peep. It can be very piercing. And if you know what that is, can you put that in the chat, please? Any answers yet?
Peepers.
Absolutely. So this is the spring peeper, probably the most recognized call of frogs. So it has a little X on its back. It's only a few inches. To the right, we have our largest frog. So we're looking at the smallest and the largest. And the largest one is our bullfrog. So that's the American bullfrog and has that very, very deep call, kind of sounding like rug-a-rum, rug-a-rum. Some people think it sounds like jug of rum as well. And the bullfrog is one that you can actually tell the difference between the male and the female by looking at it. So right behind the eye, there's a circle. I don't want to, yeah, here we go. Can you see my cursor? Sometimes it shows, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, we can see it.
Oh, good. So this area right over here, this is like the external ear. It's called the tympanum. And if it's smaller or equal to the eye, it's considered to be a female. If it's larger than the eye, it's considered to be the male. So my guess is that this is a female bullfrog. So these are, again, the first frog, I'm sorry, the peeper and that previous one, the wood frog, are the first ones to call. In another few weeks or so, we'll begin to be hearing other species, including the bullfrog. And this time of year, we begin to see some of the turtles, such as this painted turtle. So the painted turtle is probably our most common turtle. And turtles will get algae on their back. And one of the things that they'll do to get rid of the algae is they'll sun themselves. So they'll be basking on a log or on a rock, in this case, just getting the sun on their back, and then the algae will fall right off. So a turtle as well as a frog are both cold-blooded. So the temperature, their internal temperature is whatever it is outdoors. So on a cold day in the winter, they hibernate, and then they come out in spring, and on warm days, that's when we see them much more active. Okay. How about this plant over here? Oh, I already wrote it. I can't ask you what it is. This is the skunk cabbage, and the skunk cabbage is actually one of the first plants to come out, and the leaves will heat up the environment around it. So it's not unusual to see the leaves of the skunk cabbage, and you can see them, and then right around it, just like in this picture, the snow is beginning to melt. So here's what they would look like in a few weeks, where you have some of the larger leaves over here. And one of the lesser known flowers is the beautiful flower of the skunk cabbage. I really do think it's beautiful. However, I also think it can look like COVID over here, but it's not. So this is the tiny flower called the spadix of some plants, including the skunk cabbage. So those little yellow flowers, that like raceme of all those flowers, are the beautiful, beautiful flowers of the skunk cabbage. So you have to look through those leaf-like structures to see it, but it's very pretty. Skunk cabbage, I think, is an often underappreciated plant. I have never done this, but I've been told that if you boil the leaves in water 3 times, you can actually eat them, and it doesn't taste like a skunk.
Patty, Linda O says that bears love skunk cabbage.
Absolutely right, Linda. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. And these are what we'll begin to see in probably a few weeks. So these are the fiddleheads of ferns. And it's going to take a while till our forest will look like this, with a lot of ferns over here. But certainly we think of summertime and late spring as the lushness with the ferns. So some of the fiddleheads are edible. Most of them are not, but some of them are. The ostrich fern, which is not actually the fern that's in the picture, I'm pretty sure the picture is hay-scented fern, but the ostrich ferns are considered to be a prime edible. And I have eaten those, and they are very good. Now we're going to take a look at a few spring ephemerals. And so an ephemeral is a spring ephemeral is a plant that comes out early in the spring. It comes out before the trees are blooming or before the leaves come out, so that there's no competition for the sun. So these are the real early wildflowers that we haven't seen yet, but we will probably be seeing in a few weeks. So the one on the left, this is trout lily, and a beautiful leaf that is actually edible as well. It tastes like cucumber, and this is the beautiful trout lily. The Jack in the Pulpit is the one to the right, comes out a little bit later. This one is bloodroot, and named because its root is like a deep red color, so kind of looks like a blood color. This in the past has been used medicinally for several purposes. It's also being studied now for skin cancers, and it has a beautiful, beautiful white flower and just can carpet the floor where you find this. These spring ephemerals, as I was saying, they come out early. They don't usually last more than 3 weeks or so. And once the leaves are on the trees, they're shaded out and they move on into other phases of their life, and other flowers will replace them. Here's some more bloodroot. And this is bluets or Quaker ladies. And you can see these in a bluish color, a purplish color like this. Also, we can see them as white. In fact, I sometimes would prefer to call them whitets, because sometimes I think there's more white than blue. Sometimes these, you can see them on lawns, so you don't have to go into the woods. So sometimes when they're coming out in April or so, it almost looks like melting snow, and these are these beautiful little bluet flowers. And then we have the lovely columbines. I'm sure many of you have been to Wistariahurst to be able to see some of their flowers, which we were talking won't come out probably till May, but I'm sure you'll see some beautiful blooms there as well. Another spring ephemeral, which is found in the forest, is the fringed polygala. Another name for this is gay wings, but a beautiful purple flower. And this is called squirrel corn. The flower looks very much like a kernel of corn. And then there's the lady slippers. So we do have a few different varieties of lady slippers in our area. We have white, we have pink, and we have yellow. The lady slippers, a lot of people years ago used to pick them. They're so pretty. They're in the orchid family, and the orchid family has some of the greatest variety and number of species, also some of the rarest species. And a lot of people have tried to pick orchids and try to cultivate them and grow them. And many of them, including the lady slipper, need a fungus or the root of a fungus, what's called the mycorrhizal, the root of the fungus, to grow with it in order for the lady slipper or the orchid to survive. So when people would pick them and try to transplant them, they weren't aware of that. And if they didn't have that it's called a mycorrhizal relationship. So if they didn't have that, then the lady slipper would just die. There's some places where you'll go and you'll see mats of these, lots of places with sandy soil, like on Cape Cod, and certainly some places in the Connecticut River Valley. Some of you probably have your places where you visited where there's lots of like yellow lady slippers. So a beautiful, beautiful plant. There's a close-up of it. And then there's our red trillium. We also have painted trillium. We have white trillium in our area. And the wood sorrel, another deep forest species. Spring is also the time with the poison ivy. And personally, I think the poison ivy is very pretty. So especially in the fall, when you get the kind of red crimson color, but even this in the spring when it comes out, kind of beautiful, beautiful green, brownish leaves. So just be aware that you can get poison ivy anytime in your life, but more likely in the spring, summer, and early fall. I used to be one of those people who would say, I never get poison ivy. And then it took until I was in my 40s and I was pulling up some bittersweet and accidentally pulled up a poison ivy vine and was not very happy. And they say that your immunity changes throughout your life. So spring is a time when we begin to see some butterflies and moths. The very, very first ones to come out would be the one on the left, which is called the mourning cloak. And I saw my first mourning cloak butterflies on Monday. The first ones to come out are ones that have hibernated as adults. So the mourning cloak to the left and the spring azure, also called the blue azure, are some of the very, very first ones, and we can start seeing them now. So if they hibernate as an adult, they don't have to go through their whole life cycle. Most of the other ones that come out a little bit later have hibernated as larvae or possibly as eggs. So the one on the left is the painted lady, and the one on the right is one of the swallowtails. There's several species of swallowtails. Each of these butterflies has a specific plant that it goes to for its food source. The one on the left over here is called a pearl crescent, and on the one on the right is called a cabbage white. And the one on the left over here is the monarch butterfly, and the one on the right is called the viceroy. So the monarch butterfly, many people are probably familiar with the fact that monarch butterflies, if eaten, can be toxic to many critters. So they do have a chemical which would make critters sick if they ate them. And the viceroy butterfly, the one on the right, does not have that toxin. However, the critter that's trying to eat that hopefully won't know that. So the strategy of the viceroy is to look very much like the monarch. And there is a difference that we can see between these two. So you can see on the viceroy that line that goes kind of on those the middle two parts of the wing, that line that comes right over here. You're not going to see this on a monarch, but you will see this on a viceroy. And then with the monarch, these lines over here are certainly thicker with the monarch. And then we get into the birds. So I'm going to ask you to put in the chat if you have seen a robin in the wintertime. We often think of robins as the harbinger of spring. So you can just put yes, or you can put no.
Yes, rarely, yes, are some of the responses.
Okay, great. So the robin is not the harbinger of spring. We have robins throughout the winter. And what happens is that many of our robins do go south, and yet many of Canada's robins go south as well, and only south as far as our area. So birds they don't need to migrate, and they don't want to migrate. It's dangerous to migrate, but the whole thing is about food source. So if they can't find a food source, they will migrate. So many of the robins, some of our robins stay around, and some of the robins that we have in the winter actually come from the north. They're not eating worms, which they would be eating in the spring and the summertime, but they are eating berries. Some of you may have seen plants by your house that have berries on them, and you may see them one day, and then the next day they're gone, and maybe a flock of robins was around. We're now seeing the robins that have been in the south, and many of them are beginning to come back now. Another early bird to come back is the red-winged blackbird. So some of you have probably seen this bird for weeks. They do come back to our area starting in February. We hear that kind of familiar conklary type call. I know in my backyard, we've been seeing flocks of red-winged blackbirds. They do like to be by a wet area, so great for swamps. I mentioned some of those rituals of spring, that seeing salamanders was definitely a ritual. Another ritual is looking at this kind of funny looking bird over here. And this bird is called the American woodcock. It is a shore bird that's moved inland. So it's related to the sandpipers and plovers and yellowlegs. And this bird lives in inland, so it lives in our area. Most of the winter population was south of us in the southern states, largest population being in southern Louisiana. But late February, early March, they began to come back. And in the fields at this time of year, the male will do his amazing courtship ritual. And what he does is he struts around, and I should say that it's about 15 minutes after sunset. So there's just a little bit of light, twilight, and he's strutting around in fields doing this call, going peep, peep, peep. And he continues to do that, maybe up to 30 times, and then he'll fly up into the sky, up 200 to 300 feet, spiraling around, making a whistling sound. As he's doing that whistling sound, that's actually coming from his wings. And a scientist discovered this by removing 3 primary or outer wing feathers, and the bird didn't make a noise. So their theory was that the sound was coming from their wings, and that they were absolutely right. So he gets up to 200, 300 feet, and then will start to zigzag down. And when he starts to zigzag down, there's another sound, which is heard from the vocal cords, and it's almost like a chirping sound. Then he gets right before 50 feet from the ground and goes straight down and begins to do it all over again. So if you open your doors, if you're sitting outside or going for a walk at night and you're by a field in this time of year, in the evening, and you hear this peep, 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 you're probably witnessing a woodcock. This happens in the early morning hours right before sunrise as well. Another bird to come back, an early one, is the turkey vulture. So the turkey vulture is a vulture, and it is a true scavenger. The pictures actually show that it doesn't have any feathers on its head, which is good if you're a scavenger, because you would be putting your head into dead things. So better to be not have feathers on your head. Turkey vulture is an amazing bird. I think a lot of people don't appreciate it. It's not the prettiest up close, but if they're soaring in the sky, like in their dihedral, holding their wing, meaning holding their wings like in a V, they're absolutely beautiful. Another early bird is this one called the wood thrush. And this one has, I think, the most beautiful call of any bird in the forest. I'm sorry, I had hoped to be able to play some sounds here, and my computer isn't working for that. But if you get a chance to just Google wood thrush call, it's like a flute call. Absolutely beautiful. And then there's some birds that have been here all winter and are beginning to set up their nests. So we have the red-bellied woodpecker, which is a newcomer in the past 30 years or so to Massachusetts. It's one of those species that has expanded their range north. And then to the right, we have the pileated woodpecker. Some of us may remember Woody Woodpecker cartoon. Woody Woodpecker was a pileated. And then there's the beautiful bluebirds. So the bluebirds have been around all winter, and they also would be eating berries, but now they're beginning to establish nests. So if you have a bluebird box, it's a great thing to put it out, and the bluebirds might take over or might nest in your bird box. The picture on the left is showing a goldfinch, what it looked like in the winter time. And then on the right is showing its plumage, or what it looks like in the springtime. So we're now seeing the goldfinches begin to get their spring plumage in that beautiful yellow color. And we may see some cedar waxwings. These are beautiful, beautiful birds, and named after, going after the cedar berries. These are not cedar berries that it's eating now, but the cedar waxwing is a berry eater and another gorgeous bird to be looking for in the spring. And then there's some of the common birds that have probably been around all winter, but the blue jay and the American crow. So these are members of what's called the corvid family, not COVID, but the corvid family. And the smartest of all birds, the crows and the ravens, are literally considered to be the bird brains of the bird world. Our chickadee, our state bird, they've been around all winter, but now we're beginning to hear the spring calls of the chickadee. So birds have songs and calls. So the song of the chickadee is what we think of that beautiful spring's here, or kind of Phoebe type call. And the call is what we think of as the chickadee-dee-dee-dee, chickadee-dee-dee-dee. Most birds, the males are the only ones who do the singing, and that's because they're doing that to establish their territory as well as to attract a female, whereas both of them can do the calls, which are not as musical. Our cardinal has been here all winter, but we'll begin to hear it singing as well. I just mentioned that most birds will do the calls, and that the males are usually the only ones that do the songs. The cardinal is an exception of a handful where the female can be doing the song as well. And in the spring, there's the warblers, are a group of birds. They're insect-eating birds. So they come back starting probably in April. We'll begin to see early ones, such as this black and white warbler, and they're considered to be the gems of the bird world by many bird watchers. They come in so many different colors, and in our area we can have around 30 different ones passing through or nesting here. And again, just beautiful, beautiful colors. These birds are best seen early on, before the leaves are completely out in the trees. Once they're in the trees, it's really difficult to see, but again, just beautiful colors. The one on the left is the chestnut-sided warbler, and the one on the right is the male beautiful American redstart. Both of these are both males. The males and the females of most warblers look very different, so that's sexually dimorphism. Then the one on the left is called the black-throated green warbler. Certainly does have a black throat, but I wouldn't consider it a green bird. The one on the right is one of the more common and most beautiful ones, called the yellow warbler. This is not a warbler, but another bird that we'll begin to see. Actually, it's been around all winter as well, but this is the Carolina wren. And we'll begin to see some other colorful birds, such as the scarlet tanager on the left, I think a lot of people's favorite, and then the Baltimore oriole on the right. This is one of my favorites. This is called the eastern towhee. I mentioned that birds have calls and songs. The towhee's call sounds like its name. So it kind of sounds like it's going towee, towee, towee. And then its song sounds very much like it's saying, drink your tea. I usually answer back by saying, I'd rather have coffee. Then looking at it's the time of year for nesting birds. So many people in the area now are seeing and reporting eagles. And in Holyoke, I believe there's an eagle nest that can be seen, think from the Stop and Shop parking lot. There's an eagle nest in West Springfield, Agawam. We have one at the Arcadia Wildlife Sanctuary in East Hampton. So there's now over 50 pairs of eagles. The eagles are a real success story in Massachusetts. Their numbers had plummeted and there were no nesting populations for about 30 years. And that was due to DDT as well as habitat destruction. But they now are restored and it's not unusual to see them around. So they're an early nester. Here's one of the first pairs of eagles to be born in Massachusetts in captivity. And the one on the right is the adult eagle. It takes 5 years to get the white head and the white on the tail. So you can see on the left, and when they're young, they're very black. And in fact, they can be confused with a golden eagle, except that we don't have golden eagles around here. It's pretty unusual to have one going through. It's nesting season for the ravens. The raven is another bird that's doing just fine in Massachusetts. It's related to the crows and the blue jays. And I mentioned that whole family is considered to be the smartest. And the raven is considered the absolute most smartest bird. There are so many stories about the raven and showing its intelligence. If you Google, there's all sorts of things, just intelligent ravens. It can actually do a 7-step process in order to get food, and then it can remember it. These little things on the left are actually young, very young barn owls. Oh, just a ball of fluff. And to the right is the adult barn owl. And then these on the left would be young great blue herons. And then to the right would be an adult great blue heron. And I didn't put a picture here, but I did just want to mention that if you just Google bird cams, eagle cam, there's all sorts of online cameras, live cameras of eagle nests, of peregrine falcons, of great blue herons, and it's a great thing to watch. And then there's mammals that are active. So the bears are not true hibernators. Some of you may have seen some of them in the wintertime. Some of you may be aware that the female gives birth in the wintertime and cannot sleep through that. So they go into a torpor or kind of a deep sleep in the wintertime. But again, they're not true hibernators. And they are coming out when basically they were sleeping, they were less active, but they're becoming much more active now. So if you do have bird feeders, it's a good thing to take them in, especially at night now when the bears are active. They have an absolutely fantastic memory. So if they find a bird feeder by your home, be well assured that they'll be coming back for it. We try to take ours down at night, and if the bears do come during the daytime, we'll have to take them down as well. The bear population is doing just fine. These 3 bears are seen walking the streets of Florence, Mass. And now the skunks are coming out as well. So they might be in your yard digging for some grubs. I kind of welcome them in my yard because the grubs are doing damage to the crop, the plants. And so I'm not too sad when I see the skunks around. The deer will soon be having young over here. The young deer have the little spots over here, and when they're born, they don't have any smell at all, which is a great adaptation because the female may need to leave them to search for food. And by leaving a young like this on the forest floor, the sun shining through, it's very, very camouflaged and without any scent. Predators hopefully would not see this young deer. The bobcats they've been around all along in the winter time, but this is their mating season as well. In Massachusetts now, the bobcat population is just fine. The raccoons are out as well. And it's really spring. So get out, enjoy, and take advantage of all spring has to offer. And we're so fortunate to have some wonderful places in our area. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you, Patti.
Sure.
So if anybody has any questions, I put a couple of in the chat. Where and how do butterflies hibernate?
Good question. So most butterflies would actually, the adults would lay their eggs or a cocoon for the winter time. So if they lay their eggs, a lot it would be underneath the bark of trees or underneath the ground. And if it's a cocoon, so it was a caterpillar that metamorphosized, and the cocoon would be often in the same places, underneath the bark, or in a cocoon situation, it could be on branches on trees. And then they would hatch in the springtime. Very few of them actually do survive the winter as adults, but the ones that I showed you, the mourning cloak and the spring azure, the two of them those species would hibernate underneath tree bark. So good question.
So if anyone else has a question, you can shout it out or raise your hand or put it in the chat box. Have any of you seen any of the birds or animals that Patti was talking about in your backyards, or have you been out in the woods?
Whoops, excuse me 1 minute.
I realized I was muted.
Skunks under the deck.
Oh, yeah. Jackie, did you have a question?
No, I'm just listening. I'm over here in Florida. I'm not seeing a lot of birds and flowers, but we're not in Massachusetts right now. We'll be home shortly. So I loved it. I loved hearing everything, Patti. It was great.
Thank you. Did you say you're in Florida?
Yeah.
Yes,
right now.
a whole bunch of different species.
So you're a snowbird then?
Yes.
Oh yeah. I guess that's what they call us. Yeah.
Let's see. Deborah says there's eagles in Hadley. And Carol Fournier says, I've been seeing a juvenile bald eagle in Holyoke near the reservoir.
Great.
Marianne says, I got to see a huge group
Nice.
of the ravens you talked about last time, flying at dusk down 91 in Springfield, and loved it. That's very cool. That must have been exciting to see.
Great. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to see. And the bald eagle in Holyoke, Carol, was that by the Ashley Reservoir? I know, yeah, there's eagles that certainly can be seen in Holyoke from the Ashley or Ashby, I think, Reservoir.
Ashley
Yes,
Reservoir.
yeah.
Yeah. And the bears, so I know on Facebook there's a South Hadley and Granby bear sighting group. So like you can almost track them by people's backyards. They'll post that, the bear's been here last night in my trash, and then they're at this road. They kind of track them as they move around the neighborhood. So they are active.
Yes.
We see them all the time in our backyard. They're always coming, and we have to take our bird feeders down. Of course, we take them down when we leave, but yeah, a lot of bears around. We're in West Toyo and right around in there, and we've got water in the back, and so there's a lot of bears.
It's amazing how they're spreading east as well. And I think for those of us in Western Mass, we've been able to deal with them and live with them. But I worry about what happens when they get on the other side of 495.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody saw pine grosbeaks. Great. This was a wonderful winter for a lot of the northern finches and the downy woodpeckers, turkey vultures, coyotes. We've been seeing a red fox in our yard, and the red foxes, they can give off like a death curdling scream. So a lot of people, I think, blame the fishers and blame other animals, but a lot of times it's the red fox.
And Patty, do foxes hibernate, or are they active in the winter?
They're active. They're active. And we have in Massachusetts, we have the red fox and the gray fox. So 2 different ones, both beautiful animals.
What type of sound does it make, the red fox? Because is that like during the night?
You were breaking up a little bit, Carol. Typically, it's like a yip, 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 yip call, but also when they can give it's literally like a death curdling scream, like someone's being murdered. There's a lot of sounds online. So again, if you just Google, you would be able to hear those things.
Any more questions for Patty? This has been really wonderful. I always learn something new, and you excite me to get outside and keep my eyes open on what's happening around us.
Thank you.
Yeah. And can you give us a little information about what's happening at Arcadia? Like, what are their hours? Do they, are they open? Are they allowing people to walk around?
Sure. Yes, we are open for people to walk around. And as I mentioned, if you'd like to get out and see the frogs, it's spectacular. So we're open basically dawn to dusk, and to see the frogs, just come to the parking lot. You'll see the main building, walk around to the boardwalk, and you'll hear them calling. And we do have preschool in the mornings. So maybe come in the afternoon. You're welcome to come in the morning, but just know that there'll be little kids around. And we're open weekends as well. And we're doing limited outdoor programming. So we are going to be doing some wildflower walks. We're doing bird walks in May. You can get on our website, which is, I guess I can put it in the chat. You could just Google Arcadia Wildlife Sanctuary, but just www.massaudubon.org. And in the spring, we have beautiful trails filled with wildflowers. I know you can go to Wisteria-Hurst and see that as well. Ours are all native, and as I mentioned, bird walk. So we hope to see you. Please come, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.